Welcome, everybody, to the Command Show. We're excited today to have a special guest, a dear friend of mine, mentor from many years ago, Battalion Chief Mark Brunton from CAL FIRE. He's here to talk with us today about the Wildland Urban Interface, or WUI. For those of you on the East Coast, it's WUI. You guys don't know what a WUI is if it bit you in the butt. But I think I saw grass one time when I was in New York City. Well, you know, if Central Park started burning, this would be relevant for the FDNY guys listening. But anyway, it's today's or this month's insert, I should say, for June of 2023 is WUI, Wildland Interface, and it's not just California, even though we joke that it is. It's throughout the United States now. And Chief Brunton, I think I first met you. Gosh darn it, I'm going to say in 1993, maybe four.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Before, I think you were a captain at Cameron Park Fire before it became CAL FIRE, if I remember right.
Yeah. Right.
So he has always been a mover shaker and somebody who's been very much engaged and passionate about the job. And so we're very honored to have him. And Chief Brush, my co-host, is here with us today. Good afternoon, my friend. How are you?
I'm good. I finally got my FDIC submission in about 5 minutes ago. It's due tomorrow, so
yes.
Putting some stuff off, but excited about all we have going with the submitting for those and getting to review those submissions here coming up and getting our book in. And it's just a very exciting time in the fire engineering family and in our group. So.
It sure is. And to that point, thank you, Chief Brush, for all the hard work and help and inspiration with this book. We are indeed in the throes of finishing up our manuscript for Mastering Fireground Command Calm to Chaos. It is going to come out, God willing, at FDIC 2024 in April next year. And we're feverishly trying to meet our deadline so we can meet that timeline. So we're hoping it's going to happen. Within that book is over 30 amazing contributions from fellow academics, if you will, students of this job, incident commanders from all over the United States, including FDNY, LA City, Miami, and everywhere else, including our friend Chief Brunton from CAL FIRE, who contributed to us in a wonderful piece on a fire that he was at several years ago. But I'm going to just turn it over to him as soon as we can. We'll ask him some questions. But for those of you who don't know what the Wildland Urban Interface is and what CAL FIRE is, I think I want to give Chief Brunton a chance to kind of explain what his fire department is, what it's about, because we're talking to a national and even international audience here. So maybe, Chief Brunton, you could tell everybody about CAL FIRE and kind of how it works and what happens about this time of year with everybody, and then what you guys are doing about the Wildland Urban Interface coming up here.
Certainly. So CAL FIRE is a really unique agency. It's a state agency, state of California, obviously. And we have just, to my FDNY brothers and sisters, we've just exceeded you as the largest fire department in the United States due to a lot of the growth in our agency for a variety of reasons. So we're over somewhere around 11,500 personnel. Line personnel in our agency. So we have the entire state of California. It's a really unique relationship because we have municipalities and so forth that we interact with. Our original primary core mission is under the Public Resources Code, which is government code, is the responsibility and jurisdictional authority for all wildland fires on state and private lands. So that makes it kind of unique there. But we do interface and work directly with a variety of cities, counties, fire districts, and so forth. Also, we're an all-risk agency. We have had since the 40s what we call cooperative fire protection agreements, in which we provide services to municipalities, whether it be a county, city, fire district, or so forth, to do that mission for them. And so they contract with CAL FIRE to provide that service. So we wear many hats, kind of jack of all trades, if you will. But our core mission still is the wildland mission in the state of California. Over the years, we've become preeminent authorities on it just because we got a lot of practice at it. Just like any other agency, and your target has and so forth, you do enough of it, you get very good at it. And so our agency, because we have these fires multiple times throughout the fire season, and then our fire season has grown people call it global climate change, whatever it may be. I don't know. There's been a change. I've been doing the fire service for 35 years, and I've got to say, probably within the past 8 years, we've seen such intense fires and large-scale, devastating fires in the state that we've never seen before. So it's kept us very active. We've learned a lot of lessons and continue to evolve and develop in this arena. So it's been pretty crazy, and we've been rising to the occasion. But I'm sure folks, no matter where you're at, every fire season during the summer, you see the large devastating fires in the Western United States, and in particular California. That's what we face. That's the challenge we've been facing, for the past number of years. And so we're developing and changing our tactics and how we do things, and prevention, and again the expansion of our agency because of the need based on these incidents. So that's kind of just a general overview of what we do in CAL FIRE and what our core mission is.
Outstanding. Thank you. Out here in California, CAL FIRE is everywhere, literally, and it's commonplace to see them not only in fire season but throughout the year, because you guys have what are called Schedule A companies that are basically a typical urban firehouse with a Type 1 engine, just like any other jurisdiction would have. These are usually fire districts that contract with CAL FIRE. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's fire districts, cities, counties. Our largest cooperative agreement is Riverside County in Southern California, where CAL FIRE is the county fire department. They have well over 100 stations in that contract alone. Like I said, Type 1 engines, ladder trucks, full truck companies, medic units, water rescue programs, hazmat teams, you name it. Somewhere along the way we dabble in it, and then also kind of a crossover intermix is our air program. We have a very robust air program, and some of that crosses not only the wildland aspect, but especially our copter program, doing aerial rescue services with that program as well.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned. I was literally just going to ask you about the air ops. Brian, I can see you squirming and smiling because I know you love this stuff. Any comments, questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm excited to have the chief on. I'm a CAL FIRE alum myself. It was California Department of Forestry at the time. The seasons of 98, 99, and 2000 up in the Sonoma Lake Napa unit. So born and raised.
That's where I started.
Yeah, nice. So I was born.
Yeah, I started at Glen Ellen Station.
No kidding. I was at Hilton, so it was a good time.
Yeah.
It used to be Slow Noma, but since then it's gotten a little busier. So it's kind of neat because being brought up in that and being a young kid traveling the state, going to these fires and knowing how things moved around and scaled up, it was all I knew. And then to relocate to Oklahoma and Colorado and then back to Oklahoma. It's great to have you on because I think there's some things that we take for granted in the California Fire Service that is not known throughout the country as far as ways to build efficiency and scale up and scale down. And it's just a tried and true system out there out west. And I'm excited to have you on to kind of share that with a bigger audience.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I forgot about that part. Your pedigree, the CAL FIRE beginnings.
We're everywhere.
You guys are, man. You're everywhere.
I was
everywhere.
Green jeans and khaki tops. We looked more like sheriffs than we did firefighters, but that's since improved. So
yeah,
that's improved a lot. The blues, that blue uniform. So when you Chief, when you mentioned the 11,500 line personnel, does that include seasonals or is that full time?
That does include seasonals, but a vast majority of that number are permanent personnel. Although our seasonal force is starting to grow because of the change in our fire crew, a hand crew program, which was traditionally been staffed through a cooperative agreement with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. We utilize inmate firefighters. Due to some legislation over the past few years, that pool of personnel have reduced greatly. Due to diversion programs back to the county and so forth. So that program has had to scale back, and that's something we rely on very heavily in our wildland firefighting. It took a tool out of the toolbox for quite a while. The way we remedied it was to look at cooperative agreements with the California National Guard to utilize some of their personnel for the crews, fully trained up as a Type 1 crew, California Conservation Corps. But that pool is only so big as well. So we had to expand, and although it is more expensive, it pays off dividends. And so we have our seasonal firefighters we've created into crews. It's something that was dabbled with for a long time, but due to the expenses, it was kind of cost prohibitive. Now we just kind of forced the hand, and we just had to kind of swallow take the bullet and just and do that. But it's turned into a fantastic program. It's been around now for about 3 years. It's expanding. So that's been another way that we've expanded the numbers of our personnel. So we still have a fair number of seasonal firefighters, but we've also, our department has gone forth to expand our roles with our permanent personnel. So that's also part of the big number.
You know, what's great about CAL FIRE, and you mentioned it at the beginning, is all risk. And, you know, right now, people hear all risk, they know what it means for the most part. So a fire department in the middle of America will say, hey, we're an all risk agency. But CAL FIRE really has perfected the notion of all risk and on a massive scale. So, you know, when Brian was coming up, you know, I'm sure the notion of being on a tiller truck or whatever was you know, not quite the commonplace, but, you know, CAL FIRE does span that whole spectrum of the urban environment, the vegetation, wildland environment, the air ops, the ground ops, water rescue, urban search and rescue. And you guys can run a house fire. You can run a 500,000 acre, you know, fire with 500 homes burning and scale. And that's one of the things that we talk about in our book is the use of ICS on everything. And for CAL FIRE, that's, you know, that's just the way you're raised. That's all you know. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about how you develop your officers, what the culture is of the incident command system as it pertains particularly to structure fires.
Yeah, certainly. Its command system is everything. It, you know, obviously started in California in the 1970s and that was due to large, devastating wildland fires, in particular in Southern California. Talking WUI, they were having a lot of fires like the Bel Air fire and so forth that departments didn't have any sort of organized form or fashion to run an incident per se, especially with other agencies. What may have worked internally for them and how they ran it worked for them. But when you started integrating other agencies, there really wasn't a common way to communicate. There wasn't a good common way to run and organize. So through that, organization called FireScope was created, and they created ICS as we know it today. And it's evolved, and it's gotten even better. It's our basic bread and butter tool. We use it all the time. CAL FIRE, because of how busy we are, and especially in the wildland elements, it's a very useful tool for us, and we're very, very comfortable with it. So you start as Chief said, you know, when you started as a seasonal firefighter, that was ingrained into you right off the bat. You learn that terminology, you learn how that organizational structure works. So we raise our young all the way up as they get into becoming permanent firefighters and then company officers. That's how we do business. And so we do a lot of training on that. Obviously, we use it on a daily basis on any of our types of incidents. Because it is scalable, we can use it on, you know, a single traffic accident all the way up to, like you said, a 500,000 acre wildland fire with lots of complexity to it. So we do a lot of training, obviously, in it, and our company officers as we develop them, and we have great development programs to create our company officers, full-on academies, centralized statewide academy that they go through when they become a company officer. And then on the local level, our department is, you know, a large department, so it's broken into 21 administrative units, which can be a group or a county itself, and has a structure there. And so when they go back to that, each individual unit also has additional advanced training to develop their company officers on everything, skill sets and so forth. But to the core function of it, it all comes around ICS and using that as a tool.
Outstanding. Love it.
What I also remember too is, you know, you talk about 11,000 members, but I mean, you're also responsible for over 150,000 square miles of jurisdiction. So, you know, aside from response to incidents, I mean, we would travel sometimes 8 to 10 hours and then be assigned station coverage. You know, so we would be working out of a firehouse that would be 8 to 10 hours away from our initial firehouse. And to be honest with you, nothing changed. You know, the sink was the same, the dishwashing procedure was the same, the checkout was the same, a lot of times the floor plan was the same. I think, you know, it seemed like CDF had like 10 station floor plans. So you would go somewhere and it'd be pretty much identical. But I guess what I'm getting at is that the consistency and the standards and the expectations in the organization, top to bottom, led to a lot of that scalability and also just interoperability. You would be all over the state, but you're kind of all working from the same sheet of music, and that's really a strength of the CAL FIRE system.
No, certainly, and it is. It's an army. It's just like our U.S. military. I mean, we have common standards. We have like I said, all the way down to common floor plans on our stations for the most part, procedures, and that's just developed over time, and it's ingrained in our personnel. I mean, even down to our meal times. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's at a friend of mine came up with a good saying. It's our department was formed in 1885. So it's 7, noon, and 5 since 1885. That's your meal times. I mean, that's just how that's whether you're in the northern part of the state or the southern part of the state. It's kind of funny. It's gone to that kind of level, but that's part of the culture of the organization. And that is how we're successful. And we do have nuances and differences in each unit you work in and so forth. But for the most part, there is a core foundation of all those things that makes it successful. Just like you mentioned, one day, you start your day at your home unit, home station, and by the end of the afternoon, you're 8 hours away in Southern California covering another station, and it is what it is, but it keeps the consistency there.
And then, Chief, it's kind of interesting you bring up the FDNY, because I mean, I love to kind of make the parallel. FDNY probably sends the greatest amount of resources to incidents of any municipal department. I mean, probably what the equivalent of a second alarm for most areas is on a residential fire and stuff. But CAL FIRE, and now talking about the Wildland Urban Interface, being brought up in the CAL FIRE system and experiencing a high dispatch day. Again, just things we took for granted, that the standard response on a high dispatch day was what it was to these incidents. And you talk about that with other people, and they get that same look as they do when they describe FDNY's response to an apartment building. So just again, to put things in perspective, can you give us what a dispatch is to a urban interface response on a high dispatch day, which high dispatch would be the equivalent of a red flag day in most of the country?
Yeah, correct. So our day throughout the wildland fire season, which used to be maybe 6 months, it's almost year round nowadays. It's certainly 9 months. So we're kind of on this mode all the time. So the dispatch levels, we have dispatch levels of low, medium, and high, and those are based on science. And what it is we have weather readings, we have weather stations. That information is gathered throughout the day. Each unit has its own emergency command center. It's not just a dispatch center. What's unique about that is we have captains that are on the floor, and as well as our communication operator, which are dispatchers. And so that's what makes it a command center versus a dispatch center. So part of their process is they gather that throughout the day and set the dispatch levels, and that changes throughout the day depending on weather conditions. And with that, a dispatch is based on that level. So they're preset dispatches based on if you're low, medium, or high. A high dispatch in each unit, it could be a little bit different, but typically what that'll get you in most places is a response of 2 battalion chiefs, anywhere from 6 to 8 engines, type 3 engines. You'll have probably 3 hand crews, 2 dozers. Your aircraft will be typically an air attack officer, which is an air attack plane, 2 tankers, and a copter. And that's kind of in general what most places will run. You'll have a local government response along with that. So the county I work in, or unit I work in, that'll give you, on top of what I just lined out, an additional probably 4 different local government engine companies, and probably a couple water tenders with that. And then another chief officer from the local government agency. So we have a very robust response anywhere in the state with those, especially on a high dispatch. And the idea, it's our department goal is to keep 90% of the fires 10 acres or less. And we're pretty good at that goal. And the reason is we have a very robust response to these incidents. And so there's a lot. We throw the kitchen sink at it. And then obviously once you get there and based on the conditions, you can scale that response. But you can certainly augment it if needed. And if you augment it, you can just ask for whatever it is you need. Now, it may take you a little longer to get there depending on what the resource is, but what's good about a department as large as we are and the system in California with local government and so forth, we can throw a lot of stuff at an incident and give us a great chance of success.
And I think that that's just such a powerful example of that. I mean, when we talk about battalion chiefs in the CAL FIRE system, I mean, they are essentially a lot of times rolling out the door on these days as a Type 4 incident management team. I mean, that is the scale that their incidents begin at. So if you're calling for any additional resources, you're really getting into that Type 3 incident very quickly with the mutual aid, multi-agency. So it's a whole nother level when people ask about how do these systems get so good at incident command. It's because you're starting at that tipping point of a Type 4, Type 3 incident. Pretty impressive.
No, that's correct. I mean, and we start that like young, even our junior company officers and our captains. We have high expectations for them to be able to run that incident initial attack. So they're typically the first one there before the chief officer. So they set up the incident command system, and it's interesting because they're running their engine company as well as setting up this incident. But again, through a lot of practice, a lot of training, a lot of experience, they get very good at setting up a nice foundation. So by the time the chief officer gets there, they've got something that's workable, that's usable, something that we don't have to go back as chief officer and undo. And we also do a lot of training with our local government partners so that they help us out because sometimes they're there before the first CAL FIRE resource. So it sets up the success and the good working relationship and a unified command structure when we work with them. And for our chief officers, we have high demand for our chief officers. I'd say as battalion chiefs at our agency and having worked for other local government agencies and witnessing other local government agencies throughout the United States, the expectation of our BCs and what they have the authority and ability to do is greater than some departments' deputy chief of operations or chief of the department has authority to do. We give even our junior company officers to be able to spend millions of dollars of taxpayer money to mitigate that incident if they're the incident commander and first at scene. And that's in the way of ordering on more resources and so forth. When you start flying aircraft, very expensive and around very expensive. So we start that young and with that authority and responsibility. And so we take it very seriously. And it's a Type 3 incident organization most typically with some of these that get into an extended attack incident. Again, with the training and the experience of our personnel, a lot of our chief officers are even definitely qualified as a Type 1 Ops Section Chief or as a Type 2 Ops Section Chief. We have our 6 incident management teams in our department. I'm a Type 1 Operations Section Chief on IMT 3. Been an Ops Section Chief for over 23 years, and I teach our course, our statewide course, when we teach new Operations Section Chiefs, and that's what always amazes me is that that's our cream of our crop that they get sent to those courses and then get qualified to get on those teams, those top notch, and so that translates back when we're not in that big Type 1 incident, a Type 3 or Type 4 incident. They're very comfortable being able to jump in there and take on that role and run that incident.
As you're talking, I want to bring our potential listeners up to speed on incident typing. And this is something we're going to talk about in our book. Type 1 through 5 incidents are out there nationally. And a Type 5 would be a first alarm firehouse fire. Type 4 would be a multi-alarm. A Type 3 would be multi-operational period, goes over one 24-hour period and or involves a lot of other resources, which is what we're talking about here a lot. Type 2 statewide, and Type 1 is national level. That's a quick down and dirty version of what Type 1 through 5 is. What's interesting that you said is the team, the expectations of your company officers and your battalion chiefs is very high. And it's because you set the expectation at an early stage of their career. And they learn it at an early stage. And like you said, they come up in the program not knowing any different. And then they're trained for those responsibilities as they become officers. And that's what I think is tremendously lacking in the American Fire Service. CAL FIRE is probably the most militaristic, as far as a military model, fire service version of the military that there is, because of the systems and the scope and everything. but a big piece of it is your officer development, and that is really huge because you're right. They show up, and they have to potentially be the incident commander of a large scale incident that's growing, going to clearly be extended attack. Call additional resources, call more air resources, spend a lot of money, and not worry about being second guessed and being confident in their decision. And then when they pass it on to that first chief, it's seamless. And so that's one of the great things about Cal Fire, and that's why I think those of us who are in California, municipal fire departments within California, have benefited from that the fact that ICS was brought up in the state of California. We interact, virtually every fire department in the state interacts with Cal Fire on some level. I know at Metro Fire, in particular in Battalion 5 and Battalion 14, we'd run with Cal Fire all the time. I ran fires with you guys, automatic or mutual threat zone, automatic aid stuff. It was great. And you have the world coming, and we would combine resources. We had a copter. You guys had your air resources coming, and it was a blast. So let's kind of take this into the wildland urban environment because that's everywhere now. It's not just California; it's rampant around the country. Do you think that's part of why we're seeing, as you mentioned, Chief Brunton, where we're seeing such an increase in the volatility and the life loss now over the past 8 years of these fires? Is it part of it because of the urban sprawl? Is it I'm sure some would say global warming, some would say fuel management, but whatever the reason is, how are you guys dealing with it from years past, from say 10 years ago? What's going on now compared to like 10 years ago?
Right. So just as you mentioned, that really in California, and really throughout the Western United States and probably throughout the United States, the growth of the sprawl into the wildland arena, we never had that. Even as of 10 years ago, the growth in California is just insane. And so you have homes built directly into the wildland or intermixed within the wildland area. A lot of people want to move out of the urban areas for a variety of reasons, especially in California, and want to get into the foothills. And they have the ability to do so because, again, the telecommuting and so forth, that a person doesn't have to live within that urban area, and they can live in the wildland. The unit I work in is in the foothills just outside of Sacramento, and very desirable location for people to live. And the growth is just outrageous that we see. So areas that were pretty much just wildland are now just dotted with homes, or you have large communities and interface, wildland urban interface versus just strictly intermixed. So that's a huge issue and a huge challenge. That's again another area our agency expanded just a few years ago into land use planning, which was a really unique thing, and just to try to find ways to protect or mitigate potential, these fires where it takes out lots of homes and communities and so forth. In my career, again, the past few years, as I said, have been crazier than I've ever seen. I was doing some research a couple years ago and just realized that of our top 10 most devastating fires in California's history have been in recent years. And ironically, I was either a branch director or an operations section chief on my team, or standing in for another team on 6 or 7 out of the 10 of those most devastating fires in California's history. And out of the top 20, I've been on 12. So it's a lot. And it tells how in a short period of time, that's where these devastating fires have come from. So it's a huge challenge for us. However, really, it's not necessarily a new thing. It was more anomalous, but really one of the largest, most devastating WUI fires, funny enough, was in 1871, the same time as the Great Chicago Fire. It was up in Peshtigo, Wisconsin. There was like, where's that? Near Green Bay. And so I did a lot of research on it. I found that they didn't even know what the true fatality numbers were, because so many people were killed. It was around 1,500 to 2,000 fatalities from that fire. Numerous communities just obliterated, larger than in the most than anything that we've seen since then. Even places like in Maine, there's a fire that started in Arcadia National Forest, and it wiped out a number of communities in Maine. Again, these are some anomalous weather events, but nonetheless, it's been something that we've faced for many, many years. But now fast forward to where we are now in California and in the Western United States in general, we're seeing these things just take out communities. For instance, the Camp Fire in 2018 just obliterated, which I was on obliterated a full community. The mass devastation was just the craziest thing and one of the worst I've ever seen.
Yeah, for sure. I think we need to say goodbye to our friend here. He's got lots of work to do.
I do, but it's hard to leave because, again, you talk about this has been a part of our history and a national problem because it's been weather dependent. But much like structure fires, the operational tempo has just changed. The climate change has accelerated the fire spread. And the droughts are longer, so there's more fuels that is light, flashy fuels than what there used to be. And then we have a greater life threat, with the urban interface, just as we do with the toxic threat inside structures. So it's interesting. It's a fire problem that's becoming more widespread and more people are exposed to it throughout the country. And the operational tempo has to be high. And you guys truly are the leaders in being ahead of that operational tempo, as Chief Kastros talks about being ahead of the incident power curve. That has a lot to do with our approaches to things. So it's nostalgic for me to talk CAL FIRE. It's exciting, but also, I see it as a growing national fire problem. And I'm excited that we have a chapter of the book dedicated to dealing with vegetation fires and wildland fires, because it's something that has been missing from Fireground Incident Command books because it's been kind of focused on the structural world. But with that, Chief, since you are on here and I have to go, but I did want to talk about, either through Chief Kastros or yourself, about the importance of setting up divisions and groups early, especially divisions in the approach, the West Coast approach to setting up divisions versus a north flank or a west flank in the directional flanks as far as terminology. That's something that is still hanging around in a lot of the country, but it really challenges the incident commander and just the structure as the incident grows in irregular shapes. So that just kind of one key point I think could be shared in alphabet division assignments for the rest of the country, especially early on in the incident, when you have areas that could be acres and acres of just vegetation, and then getting into stretches where you do have neighborhoods.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely try to set up divisions early, even on our small initial attack. And if nothing else, one, it provides for, if that does expand, then we're ahead of the power curve. If not, it just is more reinforcement and more reps that our guys get in their head as far as being comfortable setting up divisions, even if it ends up being just a 10-acre initial attack fire, nothing fire. It just gets them into that practice because it is so important. I know nationally there's some they use cardinal directions and so forth. We found that tends to be very confusing that way. So we just set up the divisions right off the bat. We have a naming basically starting on your left flank and working from the origin, working clockwise, alphabetical, starting. Sometimes you go from traditional alpha on the left flank and the right flank is Zulu. However, we're training our folks that, hey, with all these fires, sometimes it does certain things and we button hooks around you, and pretty soon, wow, well, how do we name that? Because we kind of close ourselves off. So we're trying to, hey, instead of maybe we start off with a division Charlie and a Yankee, and that way you can expand backwards if it hooks around you. So very useful tool, and we do it very often and early, and everybody understands it because everybody is on the same sheet of music, no matter, even if you're from an agency in California that doesn't do a lot of wildland firefighting, that you understand ICS, you've been trained in ICS, so you understand that when you show up and you're signed to Division Alpha, you're going to the left flank and starting there. So it's very, very helpful tool for us. And then as these incidents have gotten massive, we've actually kind of strayed away, as parochial as a lot of us are with ICS, but we've had to get creative on how we name these large fires. Like, for instance, on the Dixie fire that I was on, because of some other previous large fires, we had to do where we were zoning the fire. So you'd have an east zone and a west zone, or north zone and south zone. And then within that, creating your branches and divisions and so forth. And sometimes you have to get as creative as where you have to use double lettering of your, so there'd be a division bravo, bravo, because you kind of run out of the alphabet because this thing has been so large. And to keep your span of control and keep your divisions that are manageable, you've had to get a little creative that way. So it's kind of mind blowing for folks that aren't used to it, and they see that. And we've had that where folks come from out of state to our incidents, and they're like, "What's this division Yankee? What the heck is that?" And but once they kind of see it and understand it, it makes some sense. But when you talk conceptually, it blows some people's minds.
Yeah, we actually in our book, we only the scope of the book is the Type 4 and Type 5 level. So vast majority of the book structural firefighting, but we do talk about wildland, we talk about hazmat, MCI, unified command, and we go up right up to that 4 to 3 threshold. And so what we're teaching is how we want to put a box around the fire, control objectives. We do left flank is Bravo, Oscar's the head, and then X-ray is the right flank to literally put a box around it. And it just kind of help people remember what your objective is and where you're going with it. So little stuff like that is fun. Don't you have to go?
I know. I was so excited. So thank you guys.
I know you can't leave.
We will continue this conversation another day. I appreciate you guys very much. We'll see you soon.
So we're literally talking about, for those of you just joining us, which you probably have been watching it since this is going to be recorded. I don't have to say that anymore because we're not live. But we're talking about the Wildland Urban Interface, and so the big thing, Chief Brunton, and I know you know this better than I do, is as you go around the country, and even within California, there's still a lot of disparity on how the usage of the incident command system, the understanding of it. People will still call a roof group, or a fire tech division, little stuff like that. For you and me, it's like nails on a chalkboard. But there's also what I see, at least we've been blessed to teach lots of departments around the country, all kinds of sizes and scopes and types. And there's like 3 categories. There's those that don't use ICS at all. There's those that use it, but they apply it probably not as it was intended, and so they don't have good experience with it. For example, they'll set up operations on a house fire, for example, that kind of stuff. And so they'll say to you, why do I need to use ICS? If I make operations, what's the IC going to do? Well, you don't need to make operations. How about just a division, and that kind of stuff. And so, and then you even talk to some of the ICS purists I've talked to in years past, who are like, well, I've been a division supervisor on a Type 3 incident or Type 1 or 2 incident with, all these miles of fire line, and why do I need to have a division on a house? Well, it's because a house is a very different animal than a 100-acre fire or more. And so we did an article a few years ago about the difference between wildland and structural ICS, and it's the same toolbox, but it's like the difference between pulling in a Ferrari and a Yugo into the garage. Same toolbox, but you're going to work on these 2 cars or 2 incidents very differently. So the WUI is literally the blending of the 2. I mean, literally have structures and wildland at the same time. And so it's to me, it's a fascinating topic to really talk about ICS nuances and so forth. For example, one of the things we talk about is, in the old days, at least, when I say old days, 90s, early 2000s, we would often use structure protection group would be something you would hear. And then we realized, well, maybe we just need to have divisions, because each division may or may not have structures, and one structure protection group supervisor can't supervise structures that might be miles and miles away. So having that one group soup, what might work on a structure fire, medical group soup, RIC group soup, well, a structure protection group soup on a 10,000 acre fire is probably not going to work very well. So those nuances are what we're talking about. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly. So that was very common, as you noted, the structure group in particular. I'm glad you brought that up. Wanted to hit that. So our department went through kind of a revamp of our entire WUI program. It hadn't seen any sort of change for many years. And funny enough, a number of years ago, when I went through the Executive Fire Officer Program, National Fire Academy, one of my applied research papers was on the need to probably take a look at and revamp how we do our structure defense, structure I-zone back then it was called. And not that I had the answer to it, but it did raise a question and things. It was things that was being talked about in our agency. So fast forward a number of years, and there's a collective group of some of the best and brightest minds in our agency. Me not being one of them, I wasn't on that committee, but they no, they did. They revamped our entire WUI program and how we look at it, and I think a lot of it was good. One of the big things they came up with was just the point about the structure group, and what we were finding with structure groups was that you would put people into structured defense or structured groups, and they would basically go and sit at a structure. So you'd have engines all over at these structures, and so forth, and what the fire was still burning, and nobody's taking care of perimeter control. Well, if the fire goes out, there's no more structure threat. And so that's the problem with the structure group. It put people in a different mindset. So one of the big things, and this was like pulling teeth and changing culture and mindsets, not only for CAL FIRE, I mean, probably the worst of CAL FIRE, but also our local government partners, was that, hey, you're assigned a division as a division supervisor. You are responsible for not only the perimeter control wildland element of it, but any of the WUI effects, any of the structured defense elements of that. That's all under your umbrella. So now sometimes that was very challenging for a variety of reasons, the amount of structures, the fire intensity, all that stuff. So as the commander, you'd have to just be careful not to exceed somebody's span of control or ability set. So, but as time's gone on, I've seen it work very well. And there's been some times when we've reverted back to the structure group element in very specific circumstances. That made it work because one of the reasons probably was because of just overwhelming the division soup because of the amount of structures in there and all the other complexities that individual was overseeing. So we still interchange it. It's not completely dead, but we have found that really the best thing is to not go down that road of structure groups and so forth. Our federal counterparts and partners, they still, because that really isn't their thing, the structure of defense.
Right.
So they're not really comfortable with that, and they still utilize that quite a bit. So for those folks throughout the country, say, well, hey, I go to these fires, and they still use structure groups. What are you talking about? And it's just because they haven't embraced it yet, and they're just not as comfortable with that yet. But I think it's one of those things that, hey, once you try it out, you'll see the benefits. It really is beneficial to do it the way we do it now.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're on the same page with that. I suspected we were. It's one of those things from experience, like you said. I mean, it was one of those deals where even at Metro Fire, where I came from, even in Battalion 9 or Battalion 14, you'd have a couple thousand acre fire. Well, there's two neighborhoods that are really far apart, and you're not going to be having one structure protection group soup taking care of both. And so, out of necessity, you find these nuances on how to apply ICS. What are the nuances between the wildland or vegetation arena versus the structural arena? What are the nuances in a commercial building versus a house? What are the nuances with apartments? And certainly the WUI. And so that's what our new book is really focused on, and why we really appreciate you contributing to that, because people think ICS stops at ICS. In other words, they can spell ICS. Okay, I know what a division, I know what a group is, maybe, and that's it. Well, that doesn't tell you how to apply it. That doesn't tell you how. It's like a doctor learning anatomy and physiology, or a paramedic learning anatomy and physiology, but then nothing else. And that's, I think we did disservice to the fire service in the 70s, 80s. When we were all learning ICS for the first time. It was nothing more than filling out an org chart. Okay, here's this org chart. Can you fill it out? Then ICS. Well, right. Okay, That is not how to apply it. It's memorizing. It's rote memory. In the field, when you have a certain type of building, certain types of conditions and resources coming, that drives the nuances of division versus group, and what am I doing here? What am I doing there? Maybe even a branch over here, and that's the stuff. That's the good stuff. That's the meat and potatoes. It only comes with lots of experience. And so CAL FIRE is like the organization that has perfected it in that arena for wildland and WUI. And so structurally, I would say your counterpart, in my humble opinion, organization would be LA City Fire as far as ICS. They are on par with what CAL FIRE does with ICS, with your mission. LA City does with their mission with ICS. In other words, they're really good at it, and they use it on everything. And that comes from the likes of Don Anthony and those guys back in the early days of being part of that fire scope evolution, and being part of that group that he was in a position to bring it to LA City, and he had the force of personality to drive it. And so You go to LA City and ride along with any battalion chief. It's like riding along with a Cal Fire battalion chief. It's ICS, everything, and there's no question about it. But when you head east in the
Oh
country,
yeah.
it starts to get right over the Rockies, over the Sierras.
Yeah.
It starts to peter out, and you see pockets of it. You'll see pockets of it. Like right now, we're doing a lot of work in Florida. Florida's doing a lot of ICS training right now, which is great. Texas is doing a lot. So, and I wonder why they're having wildland fires. They're having large scale incidents, and so they're recognizing the need. But can you talk a little bit about like what are some, back to the WUI, what are some tactics that are employed, like bump and run or fire front following, whatever you want to talk about, just to kind of give our listeners a flavor for the terminology of the tactics that might be employed during a wildland urban interface incident.
Certainly, and that was part of when our department revamped its WUI program on training. And there's a number of ones. I won't go hit every one of them, but typically for a long time in California, we were into that more of a prep and defend. So send an engine to a structure, a couple structures. They had time to prep around the structure, do all these different evolutions so that when the fire approached or hit, that could be defensible either by the company or they could leave it behind and it would still survive. And that was fine for a while, but with our changing fire conditions, that's pretty rare nowadays. Not only due to the complexities of the fires, how fast moving they are, how large they are. We don't have the resources to be able to plug a fire engine at every structure or even a dozen structures. So we've kind of had to shift our tactics a little bit. So probably one of the biggest ones, again, with fast-moving explosive fires, is fire front following. So you basically have fire burns through an area, a community, and because it's fast-moving and it's hazardous to put somebody right in the head of it or the middle of it, that basically as the fire burns through, then you follow that fire front and do whatever suppression actions you can with whether you're aircraft, whether you're a crew or engine company or whatever. And then behind you becomes what's called tactical patrol, which isn't the most glorious. It's kind of the overhaul or mop up, if you will, type situation. But what we found is where people have gotten kind of lazy about it or the fact we don't have resources is unfortunately we found some circumstances early on that fire blew through, quick knockdown, but nobody came with a tactical patrol later. And unfortunately there's fire, kind of hidden fire, and it ended up taking out structures. And so that was hard lessons for us to learn and how important that is as well. So I'd say the fire front following is probably the most common thing that we do because, again, of these fires that we're seeing. That's pretty much the only way that you're going to keep your personnel safe and the public safe the best you can. So things have changed, and we've had to adjust our tactics to meet that.
Perfect. And that goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the show, which is, you're a large organization, but you have adapted. When I started in the fire service in the 80s, it was the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. It wasn't Cal Fire, and there was at least then, from my little pea brain starting out as an 18-year-old, I didn't consider Cal Fire remotely structural, let alone all risk. All risk wasn't even a term we used. I mean, there was a Cal Fire CDF, we called it, CDF fire station down the street from my home on Rio Road in Carmel. And I remember my brother, who was a Monterey firefighter, his roommate was a Cal Fire CDF guy. And we'd go down there and hang out. But, it was a lot different than it is now. And down to the uniforms, the culture, the training, the nomenclature, everything. And so it's really made it quite impressive. Our mission with this book, again, is to really bridge that gap between what California knows and what Cal Fire knows, or the LA cities of the world know that ICS is capable of doing on a structure fire or in the urban environment, whether it's a large commercial building, an apartment fire, a house fire, multiple houses, what have you, how you can scale the ICS to fit and be much more nimble and much more tactile and much more agile to fit a faster moving incident or a different incident like a structure fire where you don't have visibility, you have more cumbersome protective equipment, you have a much more lethal environment, it's confined. You're going into a confined space that wants to kill you, and you're wearing armor that makes it hard to survive not survive, but communicate and operate in that environment. Very different than wearing, grass pants, grass coat, and a shroud, a different animal. And so those are the nuances that we are talking about. And so your wisdom, but what's fun is when you get to be our age and you get to have gray hair like us, you've had enough fires under your belt where you understand the nuances of the structural versus the vegetation or wildland. You understand the nuances of a commercial versus a residential or an apartment, and how the tactics in the ICS have to work together. Because ICS, I tell people, ICS never put a fire out, but it organized the people who did. And that's the thing is that, and that's where I think Chief Brunacini with Fire Command and IMS, he brought in the actual, structural mindset of fighting a structure fire in the context of an incident management system. And so that was the difference. And so that's the history that's kind of fun to go dive into with that whole thing. So, hey, I don't want to take up a whole lot more of your time because I know you're busy. You're clearly on duty right now. You just came from a meeting. You're on duty. I'm thankfully didn't get called out. But anything you want to add for our listeners? Again, this is an audience all over the country and beyond our borders even. Anything you want to tell them about WUI or about what to be thinking about in the coming months of the summer?
Yeah, certainly. So I just want to tail on what you're saying about ICS, not only, the structure fire environment, but, and you said like with Texas, Florida, it goes beyond that in an all risk setting once again. And it's amazing how we can use it. So I was on the mudslides in Santa Barbara. My team was deployed on that. And there's basically a USAR type event that, again, we can apply ICS to that, and it organized it well. And even to the extremely non-traditional, the COVID response. Our teams were tasked with a variety of different efforts in California to help organize the COVID response. And we use ICS for that as well. So it can fit within anything. And we even kind of joke about it, but organizing events. So if you have a large, community event or something of that nature, we just use it so much. We're so comfortable with it that it's an organizational tool, and that's what it is. And you can adapt it to anything that you need to adapt it to. So, I've seen it work, Long Beach City Fire Department, they use it for the Grand Prix races. They have a full organizational structure. I mean, it's a great tool. So if other agents aren't doing it, I know it's uncomfortable. It's a cultural change, but really look at it, start utilizing it, practicing it like anything else, and you'll get good at it. Moving on to the WUI, this year, California, we got a lot of rain in the Western United States. However, we just can't get complacent. And that's been some of our talks with our folks. And in fact, the meeting, the operations meeting I came out of, it was notarized by a chief again that, hey, let's not get complacent. We're about a month behind of what we normally are. But in all the years I've been in the job, we've seen years like, it was a wet winter and we get we're not going to have much of a fire season. And by gosh, we do. It maybe a little later, a little extended, but it always happens. And so we always have to be prepared for that. And I would recommend that anybody that's, does this, especially in the Western United States or other areas that have these kind of events, don't let your guard down, be prepared. It's crazy. Like I said, global warming, whatever is causing this, things have changed in this wildland fire environment, and especially with the WUI now with all the different, structures that are out there, and that's throughout the United States, and it's a challenge. It makes the complexity of our wildland fires much greater, very hazardous not only to the populace and the public, but for our firefighters. It has a huge amount of complexity to it, and it can be a very dangerous environment. So just like anything else we do, you train in that environment, you prepare for that environment, and we're going to have a lot of great success no matter what Mother Nature deals us. We at the fire service and California Fire Service, I don't care if you're CAL FIRE or who you are, we're ready for it, and we take it on and we embrace it, and we do have a lot of success at the end of the day.
Yeah, we definitely do, and it is about training and knowing the enemy, knowing the battlefield, knowing the tactics and weapons of war. We talk about Sun Tzu and the art of warfare, and it's the same stuff. You mentioned that before we leave, and that was all perfect. So I would like to end on that, but it brought up something else. I'll grab you for one more thing.
Sure.
You had mentioned your Type 1 team, and I think a Type 1 team. Some people might not know what an IMT is or what a Type 1 team is. A Type 5 house fire, a Type 4 commercial structure fire. Our methodology, our teaching in the book is going to be that, hey, look, that first alarm, that second alarm is an IMT. Literally, that's a Type 5 IMT or a Type 4 IMT. Whereas the definition, the roles aren't predefined. You might on a structure fire as a company officer, you might be first and you might be the IC, you might be a division soup, you might be on the end of a nozzle. We don't know. Versus a type 3 or type 1 team where it's predetermined, you have a specific role, etc. Could you kind of speak to, just so people understand, what your team looks like, how many people, what are some of the roles and responsibilities, and when they get triggered and stuff?
Absolutely. CAL FIRE has 6 incident management teams that are predetermined, preset incident management teams, and they're basically have roughly about 53 people rostered on the team. So it covers every element of the command and general staff. Each one of those has a certain amount of personnel, depending on it. Like in my operations section, we have 3 qualified type 1 operations section chiefs as the lead operations section chiefs, and then its commander has some leverage as far as with ancillary positions, how they want to staff it up. So my incident commander, funny enough, I qualified him as an ops section chief years ago, but he is very operation minded and knows the value. He's really beefed up our team in the ops section, and it's succession planning, because we're not all, we eventually retire, we move on, we promote. So we want to keep that healthy with that succession planning. So ours, like I said, 3 lead ops section chiefs. We have a trainee ops section chief, and then we carry on ours 4 branch directors, and then 2 trainee branch directors, and then we have an air operations branch director, air support group supervisor, heli-based manager. So that's kind of how our ops section is set up. Each section is a little different, whether you're finance, plans, whatever, and how they're staffed. So basically you have about 53 members on that preset. They have to be all typed out, appropriately. If you're qualified type 1, that's it. But then we have our trainees so that we develop our personnel. And so those are preset teams. We're on a weekly standby, so we all have our day jobs, but each week it rotates from teams 1 through 6, and you're up for the week, and so you're preset to go. And if you get a launch order to go deploy, then you go. And we have people from all parts of the state that are on the team. So the makeup is, you have people from Northern California, Central California, Southern California, all parts of the state. They all come together to the incident, and then they start functioning as a team. And there's a lot of qualifications and training you have to go through to get on a team, to meet national standards and so forth. So all the CAL FIRE teams are fully type 1. They've gone through all the necessary training and classes. They operate at a high level. And like anything else, one team's a little bit better than another sometimes because they happen to be fortunate enough to have people more experienced and they're with the turnover. So it's always a roller coaster ride there. But I would say across the board, our type 1 teams are bar none, some of the best, if not the best in probably the entire world. Can take on any challenge, and we'll figure out a way to make it work. Just recently in the flooding in Central California, our team was activated there to support the county of Tulare, and was responsible and tasked with something I've never been tasked with as an ops section, is to basically build a elevated road to provide an access and egress for a community that was isolated, surrounded by water. And I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but what you do is you figure it out. You find the right people that have the skill sets. And through, again, ICS, it gives you a tool to be able to organize and manage, and put together a plan and make it happen. So that's what's kind of unique and what's neat about our teams, and what is out there. And the reason it's type 1, and when I teach my ops section students, so I say, what makes you a type 1 operations section chief is complexity. And that's why you're type 1. You should be able to deal and work with any complexity there is, the most difficult challenge there is. You're going to struggle maybe, but that's your skill set. And for an ops section chief, what I look at is you're looking 72, 96 hours down the road with what you're dealing with, and you're trying to get ahead of that power curve because you're behind the power curve on that kind of incident. You're trying to get ahead of it. You're trying to plan and organize and get ahead of it. And that's what makes our teams and make our folks type 1, no matter what it is, if you're ops, plans, finance, whatever it may be. So that's kind of the overview of what we have. And we also participate in the Sacramento area. As you're well aware, we have the Sacramento Regional Type 3 team, and that's a great organization that has not only CAL FIRE people on it, but all the local agencies in the Sacramento area. And what was also great there is what CAL FIRE provided was a lot of personnel that are type 1 and whatever it is, their command general staff, and we're able to take folks that didn't have that kind of background and have elevated their game and basically to function. They're type 3 team, but they truly function easily as a type 2 and almost sometimes I've seen as a type 1 status, which is just a testament to the personnel that all the agencies have come together, who they've brought forward, and then their dedication to train and develop and become a really quality product.
Outstanding. Love it. I could do this all day.
Me too.
Oh, man. I was blessed to be on a type 1 IMT for 4 years. I was facilities in the rear with the gear, so I got good at building towns out of nowhere. But I always envied you ops guys. I was like, damn, those freaking guys, those are the real guys doing it. They're coming. I'm just going to make sure they have food, a place to sleep, and crap. Damn it. But
that's extremely important. Yeah, if you don't feed them and sleep them, then they're useless in the field. So that's very important.
Yeah. So learned a lot.
Right.
So Chief Brunton, CAL FIRE, thank you so much. Over 35 years on the job. Just a wonderful asset, a great friend, mentor, always there for us. Thank you. And we'll look forward to talking to you again soon, brother, and have a safe summer. I'll talk to you soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Andoni. Take care.